Hello and welcome. Today we will hear from two of the candidates vying to succeed longtime New York State Assemblyman Brian Kolb in the 131st District. It's a district that includes Ontario and Seneca counties and is frequently referred to as the Finger Lakes seat because of its position in the heart of the region. Democrat Matt Miller and Republican Jeff Gallahan won the support of their respective parties through the primary process, and today we'll hear from them on crucial issues affecting voters across the region. This special debate, hosted by FingerLakes1.com, has been made possible by Madej, Miris, and Ricky, the Finger Lakes personal injury attorneys. Before we begin, a quick message from them.
I was severely injured. I was on a ventilator. My husband was scared, and he just went for the nearest number that he had heard advertised over and over and figured they're the best. They know what they're doing. I think that's the typical reaction. But unfortunately, it wasn't the right one. And I'm thankful that we learned that early on in the process. He decided to look for someone locally who would give us a little more personalized attention. And when we met Steve and talked with him, we knew that we had found that person. If you want to feel like you have an attorney who's in your corner, who's going to listen to you, who's going to endeavor to understand you, give Steve a call. I really felt like everyone at Madej, Miris, and Ricky really cared.
For a law firm that cares about you, contact Madej, Miris, and Ricky at 315-568-0911. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome.
Welcome back. Before we begin opening statements, I'd like to quickly run through the rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will be given 4 minutes for an opening statement. They can use as much or as little of their time as they choose. As we move through questions and topics, candidates will be given 2 minutes to answer and 1 minute for rebuttals if necessary. Thanks to both of you for coming out tonight. We really appreciate that. And to begin opening statements, Jeff, you will start us off.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having us here tonight and mediating this debate. I was born and raised in Ontario County. And after graduation, I made 2 very important decisions. Number 1, I married my high school sweetheart, Lynn. That was 42 years ago. Number 2, I accepted a position at General Railway Signal Company in Rochester, New York. I got in their machinist apprentice program and never looked back since. So after 10 years of machining, I accepted a position at H&C Tool Supply in Rochester, New York. It was a small cutting tool distributor that serviced the greater Rochester areas and the fringes of Buffalo and Syracuse. From there, I held positions in sales and sales management, and my territories included at one time all of New York State. And at the end, I was in charge of Maine to Virginia as a sales manager. The whole Northeast was included, and I had 20 salespeople and about a $46 million budget. Fast forward 30 years later, and I got a call from an old friend of mine, and he wanted me to come back to work for him at H&C Tool. So I've landed back where I started my sales career. My political life began 15 years ago when I ran for the Manchester Town Council. 2 years into my term, then supervisor, a Democrat, appointed me as deputy. And he said, Jeff, I'm going to retire in 2 years, and I'd like you to run for my position. And that's why I'm appointing you deputy supervisor. Well, I spoke to my wife about it, and I ran, and I was successful. I'm currently the Manchester Town Supervisor, 11 years. I'm chairman of Government Ops and Insurance Committee. I sit on Ways and Means at the county and personnel. We oversee the contract and the contracts of the unions, and also we construct the Ontario County budget, which is about $270+ million. I'm on the board of directors of the Ontario County Industrial Development Agency. I'm on the Board of Supervisors as a representative for the DEC Region 8 Fish and Wildlife Management Council. I'm also a graduate of Leadership Rochester. My civic affiliations include 28 years, member of the Sons of American Legion, 29 years as Clifton Springs Area YMCA Board of Directors member, and I founded the Red Jacket Trap Shooting Club, and I'm the current coach. I'm very heavily involved with our local food pantry, House of John, all the benefits that go benefits that are available. I attend for the House of John, and I perform several charity events for the American Legion, servicing the children and youth programs and servicemen's projects. You may ask, why am I running? My wife asked me that same burning question. And my answers are my 3 grandsons, my youth, bringing up my family to have the same opportunities that I had and my wife had to succeed in their dreams. My sales career, seeing the downturn in business here in New York, especially Western and Upstate New York, Kodak, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb, Gleason Works, General Motors, Carrier Corporation, New Venture Gear, General Railway Signal. I can go on and on and on. The list doesn't end. They're either downsized to the point where they're no longer a viable large company or out of business. And how about our failing farms? That's another reason. We need less taxation and red tape so we can generate new businesses here in upstate New York, not additional taxes and red tape to drive them away, as we've been doing for the last several years. I'm the experienced leader for the 131st Assembly. I'll be able to go to Albany, negotiate for our needs here in Ontario and Seneca counties. And my years of management and local government experience is what I'll take to Albany to earn the respect of my peers, as I have done here in my sales career and my local government career. Thank you.
Matt, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you very much to Finger Lakes One for hosting us tonight. Thank you, Josh, for moderating, and thank you, Jeff, for joining us tonight. I'm really looking forward to this. My name is Matt Miller. I'm a working-class New Yorker and a 25-year-old veteran. I grew up in the Finger Lakes region and learned the importance of hard work and determination. In that hard work and determination translated to a multitude of different jobs. It included being an intelligence analyst in the New York Army National Guard, working in emergency rooms and trauma centers, waiting tables, and one of my personal favorites, working in a doggy daycare. I got into this race because New York 131 for over a decade has been underrepresented and underserved. Even our current representative, Brian Kolb, understands that sending somebody, a Democrat, to the majority in Albany is going to bring in millions of dollars of funding to our region. Our district desperately needs that. And I do have the experience. Some might say, being a young 25-year-old, I'm not cut out for this. But my job as an intelligence analyst gave me the necessary experience to carry out this job effectively. As an intelligence analyst, it was my job to look at the big picture, focus in on the finer details, notice the trends, see what wasn't working, see what was working, and then present those solutions to high-ranking officers. As an assemblyman, it would be exactly that job, to go out, see the big picture, focus in on the finer details, notice the trends of what's working, what's not working, and in this case, present a solution in the form of a bill and pass it. Being in the majority is something our district desperately needs. And even though I'm running as a Democrat, I'm not going to be a rubber stamp for downstate Democratic legislation. I'm running to stand up for the hardworking families in New York 131. And by bringing in that funding and having that representation, we can fix our roads and protect our lakes. We can start fully funding our schools. We can start lowering taxes, protecting our small businesses, keeping our small farms alive, and making sure that we can afford our health care and put food on our table. This moment is extremely critical. We can bring new life to New York 131, and I am prepared to lead you there, because when you elect me, you're not just electing me. You're electing yourself to this seat, and finally, our voices together will be heard in Albany.
All right. So as we get things started here, I would like to first ask a question that came from a number of readers. This was by far the number one question that came up. And Jeff, for this one, we will be starting with you, and then we will be alternating the rest of the evening. What are you going to do on day one if elected? And are you confident you'll be able to hit the ground running in Albany?
Well, absolutely, I'll be able to hit the ground running. I've got the experience in government, local government, and 32 years of negotiating and sales experience. When I get there, I'll be able to forge those relationships on both sides of the aisle to make things happen. The first thing that I would do when I go down there is we need jobs. We need jobs upstate. You're not going to keep anybody in this state at all without jobs. No matter what you do, it's jobs, jobs, jobs. If we can create new jobs, and we can actually, if an employer creates a new job and gets a tax break for every new full-time job that they create, that's a win-win situation. How is that? We're creating a new job, and we're giving the employer the tax breaks that are so badly needed. That would be my first line of accomplishments down in Albany.
All right. And Matt?
Yeah, for me, my plan is already laid out on my website. It's the New York Restoration Plan. This pandemic has devastated New York State. And as my first act as an assemblyman is going to make sure we get this district and our state through the pandemic to protect our small businesses and small farms. I'm calling on 100% property tax cut for small farms to relieve economic burden for them. Investments in the childcare industry is dozens and hundreds and thousands of kids are at school, from school, and not going to school. And parents are making the impossible decision whether to stay home or quit their jobs. And investing in the childcare industry is going to immediately help out our economy. We need to make sure that we're raising taxes on billionaires to make sure we can balance our budget and close the deficit. And by raising taxes on our New York State billionaires, we're going to be able to shift our Medicaid costs off the unfunded mandates and away from property taxes, which is going to immediately lower taxes for everyday working New Yorkers. New York Restoration Plan is going to be my number one act because we have to get through this pandemic and we have to recover from it.
All right. Our next question is in the realm of the state's deficit, which has been growing by the day, obviously, since the coronavirus pandemic began. How will each of you advocate that lawmakers in Albany address the fiscal deficit that New York faces right now and will undoubtedly face on January 1? Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so first and foremost, we have to cut wasteful spending. Everybody knows that. When I have to save on some money to either fix my car or to pay a bill, I'm not going to go out and buy my coffee, and I'm going to cut wasteful spending. And that's what our state needs to do. But at the same time, that's not far enough. We have to increase revenue. And by increasing revenue, by creating a wealth tax on our New York State billionaires, creating new tiers and new tax brackets for ultra millionaires, we can literally raise close to $13 billion. Right now, we're facing close to a $13 billion deficit. So in 1 year, we can close that deficit. And then that means all the money for the next annuals coming through, we're going to be able to fund our schools, fix our roads, protect our lakes, and stick up for working class New Yorkers.
And Jeff?
Yeah, cutting wasteful spending is definitely the way that we have to look. If you take the Medicaid fraud that's out there, let's take a look at the Buffalo Billion. Those programs are full of waste. As far as attacking our billionaires and millionaires, that's a direct tax that's going to end up right on the middle class, because billionaires and millionaires aren't going to wake up Monday morning and say, hey, I'm 13 billion light this morning. What are they going to do? They're going to raise the cost of their products, which is going to raise the cost of the products to the consumer, which is the middle class and lower middle class, which is going to put more tax on those same products that they're buying, and it's going to be a direct tax on the lower and middle class people. That's not going to work. We have to cut wasteful spending, which is Medicare, this Buffalo Billions, the things that we have control over, the things that we have direct control over that we can immediately impact this economy with. And it's not a millionaires and billionaires tax, because that, quite frankly, is going to be just the opposite in the long run and affect our middle class.
Go ahead.
So right now with the pandemic, 1 in 4 New Yorkers are going hungry. Our schools are facing an additional 20% budget cuts. We are not getting through this pandemic tomorrow. So while we can cut wasteful spending, that's going to take way too long. And other states who are creating ultra-millionaire tax and billionaire taxes are actually seeing millionaires move back to their states. And the thing is, these billionaires and ultra-millionaires, we're not talking about the gentleman I talked to who has a wealth of $3 to $5 million. He has just as much hardships as we do. I'm talking about the people who own close to $1 billion or over $1 billion. Something that, Jeff, if you and I work at $100 an hour for the rest of our lifetimes, it's going to take 80 lifetimes to reach $1 billion. And during the pandemic, billionaires did nothing but grow their billions. So while we take away $13 billion from them, they are still going to be billionaires. Something we will never reach in our lifetime, even if we were extremely successful. We have to act fast, and this is the quickest way to do it, and it's not going to cost us any more. It's going to lower our taxes. Unfunded mandates are what we hear all the time, and property taxes is one of them because of the Medicaid and Medicare. And by lowering taxes on the property level for us is how we raise taxes on the billionaires. And at the end of the day, they're still going to be billionaires.
So, Matt, a follow-up question to the answer that you just provided. One thing that has come up repeatedly is that spending does, in some way, shape, or form, need to be cut or be curbed at the state level. So where do you find it appropriate as a Democrat to cut spending at the state level so that the budget can be balanced in the future?
See, finding where we have to cut it, we have to be extremely tactful. And while I may have some ideas on where that can be, it's not up to me. It's up to this district, and it's up to the stakeholders who are going to play a role into this. Because what we see right now is constantly cuts to our education, to our mental health services. Those have to stop. Our folks who are dealing with mental health, our folks who are dealing with disabilities, we need to help them out. So it's got to be very carefully constructed on where we need to cut that budget. And right now, as not being an assemblyman, I can't go figure that out right off the bat and figure out based off of the pandemic, because it's an ever-living, growing problem. And each day we're going to find a new place to cut or we can't cut it because of what's happening.
And Jeff, for you, I'm curious, spending has been a taboo subject among Republicans for years, but you have mentioned that there does need to be some sort of reinvestment into the community and into upstate communities. Where would you like to see that investment happen specifically?
Well, infrastructure is number one. Our infrastructure up here is crumbling. We don't have infrastructure for our rural students to learn right now, where they're being forced to learn through Zoom, WebEx. We don't have that infrastructure. We desperately need that infrastructure. But let's think about this. $6.1 billion in debt before COVID. There's a serious problem here. There's a serious spending problem here. Now, the state of New York has lassoed all local governments and schools with a 2% tax cap, but they run off and they spend money like drunken sailors. It can't happen anymore. That needs to be reeled in. There needs to be a 2% tax cap on state spending, just like it is on spending in schools, states, and local governments. Number two, they have, for years and years, come up with these, well, since I say years and years, let's go back 5 years. They come up with these schemes about grant money. So you go into this lottery and you form a commission and you present your position on your grant money, and who knows what the criteria is with this? Who knows where it comes from? And it comes out of Albany. All of a sudden, like I mentioned earlier, the Buffalo Billion, they get all this money and it's a bust. And we're spending all these dollars, these tax dollars, frivolously. We need a plan. We need a 2% tax cap in Albany, just like we are required to have here in our local governments and schools. So until we rein in spending, we're going to have the same problem here no matter what. So now we've gone from $6.1 billion to over $14 billion. I think the federal government, needs to step in and help out a little bit, but I don't want to see those payments go through the state. I want to see those payments come directly to the schools and the local governments where it's needed, so that it's distributed properly and effectively.
And let's shift gears, but not shift gears too much here, and talk a little bit about the economy, specifically the upstate economy, rural economies, which obviously are the lifeblood of the Finger Lakes. This is a question for both of you. What steps would you like to see taken to enhance local economies for everyday working people in upstate New York? Jeff, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, like I mentioned before, we need to create jobs, and the only way we're going to create jobs is to lower taxes and get rid of the red tape. My wife and I are small business owners. I sign the front of a paycheck. I know exactly what's going on. And it's detrimental to small business, to medium-sized businesses in this state, all the red tape and the excessive taxes that they're creating to stay in business. Just in the last 3 years that we've had our food trailer, I've become very prevalent in what's going on and how difficult it is to turn a profit and run a business. And it's not conducive in New York. Now you take our farms, for instance. Our farmers are strapped with a farm bill that is making them very uncompetitive. Their competitiveness with other states for their products with this farm bill that they're strapped with right now is killing them. And now they're talking about lowering the hours before overtime before they have to pay overtime from 60 to 50 to 40. It's ludicrous. We're forcing our small businesses and our farms out of business.
And Matt?
First and foremost, it's never ludicrous to offer fair, equitable rights for a worker. The bill that my opponent is referring to is the Farm Laborers Fair Practices Act. And what it does is it makes farm workers feel just in their job. and gives them the equitable level playing field that every other worker in New York State faces. And almost every farmer I have talked to doesn't have a problem with this bill because they understand it is the right thing to do. And we do need to create jobs. And the best way we can create jobs to attract people my age, the 25-year-olds, millennials, and young professionals, is by focusing in on the climate. Our local municipalities, our state government, and our federal government can all work together to make sure we attack climate change head on so we can bring in jobs. The New York 131 has 5 Finger Lakes, a national wildlife refuge, forests and streams and beautiful nature all over. And we have to focus in on that. We can bring in solar jobs. We can bring in wind jobs. We can bring in green manufacturing jobs, which is going to do nothing but bolster our economy and make our area a better place to live.
And another question.
Can I rebut that, please?
Absolutely.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Earlier, Matt spoke about cutting wasteful spending taking too much time. I don't understand how cutting wasteful spending would take as much time as climate change, for one thing. Number two, I just had meetings with some farmers on Saturday, as a matter of fact, and I was told by this local farmer who has a very large dairy herd here in New York, in Western New York, in our district, that he took 8 of his workers to Albany, and they spoke during the public comment for the farm labor bill. They all spoke. All his employees spoke against that bill. He spoke against that bill. And let me tell you what's happening with these local farm workers. They can only work so many hours, and the farmer's cutting them back because they can't afford to pay the overtime. So instead of getting the day off and getting the time off like this bill was intended to do, that's not happening because Bill and Jane are running down the road to the next farm to get their hours in, to get the money that they've been making for the last 10 or 15 years. And now they're working 7 days a week, and they're not getting any time off. So it's become a huge problem that I believe that this was orchestrated again by downstate politicians that don't know anything about farming. And we need to educate those folks so that these types of bills are discussed and come before the whole Assembly and the whole Senate with full understanding of what the implications are when this is implicated, when this bill is passed. So I'm telling you, it's not the case. That's not the case. The intention of this bill is not happening the way that it was thought it was going to happen by these politicians that brought this bill forward.
Switching gears slightly here, would either of you support a legislative move away from IDA's tax incentives and perceive the at least perceived reality that backroom deals are what's actually creating county by county investment? If so, why? Matt, we'll start with you.
Yes, because it directly negatively impacts our region. Because when we look at those backroom deals and the way it's all folded, it always shoots off. All the money goes to Rochester or goes to Syracuse. It never comes down to Clifton Springs, Canandaigua, Naples, Varick. Never comes to those areas. So we have to. While some of those points in those kinds of deals and contracts are important to keep, we have to move away generally from the way that is done.
And Jeff?
Well, I can speak, quite frankly, I can speak to the local IDA, and I can tell you that being a board member on the local IDA here in Ontario County, last report available, 2019, the IDA with the pilot programs were supposed to provide 940 jobs to our region. In actuality, how many jobs did it create? 1,400 plus. So it is working in Ontario County. On a state level, there's what Matt referred to, backroom deals. We don't do that in Ontario County. That doesn't happen at our IDA. Therefore, we are successful with our IDA, and that's why it's not successful in other parts of the state. And that would lead into ethics, which I have a strong opinion of too.
All right. And both of you have talked about education as being a pillar of what needs to be refocused on at the state level. So a question for both of you. Voters are very concerned about the solvency of school districts in this district. What specific steps would you like to see Albany take to help schools remain afloat while staring down significant cuts? Jeff, we'll start with you here.
Well, first of all, the 20% tax cut, 20% revenue cut to schools is devastating. That does not need to happen. That revenue needs to be found somewhere else. Education is the backbone of our community, and education is in the forefront every single day. If we do not have an educated society, where are we going? Our children need to be educated, and it needs to happen without cuts from from our politicians. Another thing that needs to happen is the formulas. The formulas for state aid are incorrect, and they have been for years, and we've been screaming about it upstate forever, and those need to be changed, and they need to be fair and equitable for everybody in the state. That's how we're going to get our schools back in order.
So one very important issue is this 2% tax cap. When I was talking to the Victor superintendent, the Naples superintendent, and other superintendents in this district, that 2% tax cap has been devastating to our schools. Victor, which for me, I always thought was a premier school and always had lots of money, they're struggling. And at the start of this pandemic, because of their budget, due to this tax cap and not wanting to go anywhere near it, they only had one janitor in their entire building. And when you have 4 periods of lunch happening, that means for more than half of the day, that one janitor isn't cleaning the bathrooms, changing the garbages in the middle of a pandemic. And now we're going to see these cuts coming down. Like I said, I'm not going to be a rubber stamp for Democratic legislation or always tout the good work that Governor Cuomo is doing, because this is going to be disastrous. And on top of this, with the pandemic and a lack of broadband, how are we expecting our students to learn and go to school when our governor is telling us that he's got every inch of this state lined up with broadband? When they go to log in their classes, they don't have broadband. You go 10 miles south of Canandaigua, no broadband. So how can our schools successfully get through the year if they can't even make it to school?
And a follow-up to this for both of you. Governor Cuomo has talked, at least early on in the pandemic, about the dramatic reimagination of the K-12 experience, the K-12 education. First things first, let us know what your position is on this dramatic overhaul of the K-12 education and what changes you would like to actually see implemented. Jeff, if we can start with you here.
Well, I think the plan is it's not a good plan. Our kids need socialization, for one thing. And the plan that I've read is far from that. Without the socialization, we're a socialized type of society. That's what we thrive on. Look what's happening during COVID. Look what's happening to not only our children right now. I'm worried sick about our children, because the socialization aspect of our children is being denied right now, as is our adult community. Now, being out, going door to door, I'm talking to a lot of people about these exact subjects. And the mental health of our entire nation is at stake here, because people have been locked up for months and months and months in their own homes. They can't get out. They can't imagine what's going to happen in the next 6 months if they can't get out. This is going to lead to several issues in our society. Number one, our suicides. Number two, our mental health issues. And the mental health issues we're not prepared for. Josh, we're not prepared for any of these mental health issues right now, and we need to get prepared for them, because they're coming. They're coming hot and heavy. So as far as the plan goes, I don't agree with the plan. We need socialization with our children and with our adults in our society, and the plan, as I see it, is just asking for failure.
Matt?
I also agree. I am not for the plan. And while socialization is important, we do have to be careful, because in our region, when we look at our school districts, South Seneca Central School District is going virtual for the remainder of the week because a second student has tested positive for COVID-19. So the socialization part is very, very important, and we do need to get back to that, which is why we are not going to reimagine our education system. One point we can reimagine, what we both agree on, is the whole formula disaster for our schools. But other than that, how school is fine, and we need to reimagine things like broadband and making sure our students can be at school.
And another element that's come up a few times during the pandemic so far is discussions about potential consolidation of districts. There are concerns that if budget cuts do become a reality, that consolidation may inevitably be necessary. Do either of you support consolidation or some form of consolidation down the road if the monetary situation or the fiscal situation in Albany does not improve? Matt, we'll start with you.
As a last resort, we need to make sure we take every single step that we can possibly do to prevent that from happening. Because with some of these schools merged, we don't even have the public transportation to get some of the schools to a certain district or to a different building. So that's what I feel on that.
Jeff?
Well, they've been doing that down in the southern states for a long, long time. I spent a lot of time down there. And is it good? Is it bad? I'm not sure. I know that when I coached varsity baseball at Mid Lakes, we took the varsity team down there every year on spring break, and we're playing schools with 4, 5, 6,000 students, very large schools. They're community schools, they're county schools. I think it's something that we need to take a look at. If the funding's not there and schools are closing, I mean, we have to at least investigate and see what's going on. Am I in favor of it? No. I'm 4 miles from our local high school, Red Jacket Central School. Class sizes are small. They have a great graduation rate. They get the attention that they need. It's a wonderful school, and I would hate to see that happen and have 3 or 4 schools all combined. I don't want to see that happen. I want to figure out a way to make it work the way it is now. But if the money's not there and things happen, we need to at least investigate and see what our options are.
And now let's talk a little bit about the upstate-downstate divide that has obviously been pretty prevalent over the last 5 or 6 years in Albany politics. How will you prevent your voice from becoming lost in Albany as a freshman representative, or worse yet, being overtaken by downstate representatives over the course of time, whether it be one term or multiple terms? Jeff, we can start with you for this one.
Well, first of all, I think that the upstate-downstate rift is something that shouldn't be happening. We need to govern our whole state. We don't need to govern upstate, and they don't need to govern downstate. We need to get together. We need to be in the middle, and we need to govern from the middle. So what's best for both sides of the aisle. And let's make this state the Empire State again. And I will go down there with the attitude. I'm not going down there with the attitude it's us against them. I'm not doing that. That's not going to happen. I've been in sales for 32 years. When I walk into a customer, if there's something in there that I don't like, I mean, that's his prerogative. But if there's something in there that or something about me that he doesn't like, we get together, we make the sale, we make it happen, we do what's best for his company, we do best for what's best for my company as far as the sales operation goes, and we move on. And that's what needs to happen. The more people talk about this divide, the worse it gets. Let's quit talking about this divide and start doing something about it to bring this state back together again and make it the Empire State that it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. And Matt?
I just find it comical that we hear that we shouldn't be talking about the divide, but then yet in a public rally with hundreds of people, you say you want to go down there and wring some necks of Democrats. So that's one sure way we're never going to bridge this divide. Insightful language is just never going to solve any problems. And we need to come at this in the middle. And I have joined the Upward Caucus, which is a group of Democratic candidates, upstate Democratic candidates who are going to take our voices to the majority. And our voices aren't going to get lost because when we are freshman assemblymen, we have to latch on to every connection that we can make. And I'm already building those groups and those connections that we can actively and effectively represent upstate values. And we are going to do that. And this whole divisiveness and chaos is going to end. And we need to find somebody who isn't going to send out racially toned mailers or tell people he's going to kill them. That is not a representative New York 131 deserves. And this division has to stop.
Go on.
Wring their necks. It's like when you're coaching football and you tell them, go out there and kick some butt. It's a figure of speech. It's a definite figure of speech. It's the furthest thing in the world from a threat to someone. And I don't understand where you would come off on that, Matt. But apparently, figure of speech, you haven't been exposed to that, and that's okay. But it's just figure of speech is what it is.
Being around the country and serving in the military, I've been around plenty and have plenty of experience. And people don't get that context, Jeff. When you're sitting up there and you say you want to go down there and wring some necks, talking about bail reform, something that is extremely, extremely important to you, and sticking up for our police officers, your figure of speech was to stick up for police officers by committing a crime. So figures of speech
can... It's a definite figure of speech.
Figures of speech can be damaging.
It's a figure of speech. That's all it was intended for, is figure of speech.
And police were just brought up, so let's talk about that. There has been an active discussion, and the state and Governor Cuomo has required now that communities essentially reimagine what they're going to be creating in terms of a future vision for policing in their respective communities. Jeff, if you'd like to lead us off here, how you would like to see that handled moving forward, and what role you'd like to see the legislatures actually take in this matter moving forward.
Well, I can tell you that already Ontario County is 90% compliant with all the regulations that the governor has laid out, and we are currently working on the ones that he's laid out that we are not compliant with. I think that many of those ideas are good, but if you talk about defunding the police, how can you defund an organization such as the police and expect them to do all this extra training and to comply with what they're trying to accomplish. I think that if anything, they need more funding. Our police are out there and doing the best job that they can do every day, protecting our society and our citizens every day to the best of their ability. Are there bad apples? There's bad apples in every single affiliation that's out there, whether it be the police, a fireman, a school teacher, a janitor, a waitress. I mean, there's bad apples everywhere. And to categorize the police as bad and needs to be defunded is not my idea of the right way to tackle the situation. We need education, and believe me, I've been in sales 32 years. I still attend all kinds of education classes. And those classes teach me how to be a better salesperson, to service my customer better. And we need the same thing for all walks of life, not just the police department. So this defunding the police is in my mind, a terrible idea. I think if anything, if we're going to have these programs and we're going to train these officers, we're going to need additional funds.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, go ahead.
So Democrats do sometimes a very terrible job at messaging. And this message of defunding the police is one of those examples. Defunding the police doesn't mean that we're going to strip away all of their money so that when you call 911, there's not going to be anybody at the operator. What it means is a conservative talking point. It means to strip away excess spending. When you see police departments in New York State driving a vehicle, the same vehicle I would drive overseas in a war zone, that is excessive. And that money could have been better spent to go towards our mental health services, which is ultimately going to help out our police officers. Wanting police reform doesn't mean that we hate police officers. Police officers put their life on the line every single day. And while I haven't put on that same uniform, I have put on a uniform willing to make the greatest sacrifice. So I get it. And I understand that there's a brotherhood. But when we see great police officers like Carriol over in Buffalo get fired because she stopped an officer from using excessive force, that is the type of accountability that we're looking for. She was the good cop stopping the bad cop. And who was the one that was punished? The good apple, not the bad one. So when we talk about police reform, police accountability, and defunding the police, it just means we're going to make a stronger, better police department that has trust in the community and the community has trust in them.
Can I respond to that, Josh, please?
Sure.
Thank you. I just have one question. Mayor de Blasio decided that 600 officers needed to come off the street for defunding, and you see what the results of that are in New York City. There's a huge rise in shootings. There's a huge rise in violent crimes. There's a huge rise in all crime in New York City, and it just shows that what Matt is talking about is the furthest thing from the truth. They want to defund, and they want to reduce the size of police departments, and it's going to be critical to the safety and the well-being of the citizens of our state.
But that is not what I want to do.
So one of the things that is a constant theme are ethical concerns in Albany, in the way legislation is wrapped into the state's budget, as an example, and that becomes the major bill. What are some of the things, or even just one thing on the legislative side, that you would like to see done so that this large packaging of bills every year does not happen, and that the lawmakers who are sent to Albany actually have to legislate? Jeff, we can start with you here.
Well, I think it's crazy to tie in all these different pet projects to the budget. The budget is the budget. When we do the budget, we do a $270 million plus budget in Ontario County. What do we tie to that? Essentials for every department. There's no pork spending in there. There's nothing in there that says that Naples is going to get an extra $50,000 for their pet project, and Manchester is going to get an extra $100,000. That's not in there, and it shouldn't be in there. The budget should be the budget. We should go down. We should pass the budget, and it should be the budget, not other things that are tied in the budget, especially with legislation. There should be no legislation in the budget. It should be numbers. It should be budget numbers, and that's what the budget should be, in my estimation. Is it ever going to be that way, Josh? I don't know. I can't tell you, but I'll tell you, I would go down there and fight for that, for sure.
All right.
I too am going to go down and fight for that, because right now there's some current Democratic lawmakers who have initiated a constitutional amendment that strips away the power from the governor and puts more power into the legislative body to create this budget and to actively create laws. No governor should be able to come in, swoop in, and take control of the budget and say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're passing, and this is how we're going to do it. So I would immediately sign on as a co-sponsor of that legislation that brings in a constitutional amendment. And when you folks at home see that on your ballot in the future, please vote on that, because it's important that the people you send to represent you in the legislative body actually have the ability to do that.
Josh? I'm not aware of any Democratic legislators that are trying to strip Governor Cuomo of any of his executive powers. As a matter of fact, there was a bill that was tried to be introduced and brought to the floor to do such a thing, but it wasn't even brought to the floor. They wouldn't even see it to the floor. So our governor has these executive powers, and he has them until April of next year. So I'm not quite sure I understand what Matt is talking about, because that's what I understand is the furthest thing from the truth.
So the constitutional amendment pertains to the budget. The power that my opponent is talking about refers to emergency powers granted to the governor in the case of COVID-19. I also agree that those powers, or at least half of them, need to be taken away from the governor. So when we're talking about emergency powers or we're talking about budgetary powers, I am both in favor of taking away power from the governor.
And one thing that has repeatedly come up, not only in these races, but also in debates that we've hosted in the past, term limits. Matt, I'd like to start with you on this one. Would you support a legislative effort to essentially end career politics in Albany?
Absolutely.
And where would you put that? Where would you put that number in terms of limit?
Yeah, so first and foremost, our governor should have the same term limits as the President of the United States. If that's our highest executive body and that's what they're limited to, that's exactly what the state's highest executive body should do, be limited to that. I also think that assembly terms should be limited to at least 6 years, but I also believe that their term needs to be expanded to 3 years, because whether Jeff and I, whichever one of us gets elected, we're really only going to have 1 full year to actively legislate before it immediately turns into a re-election. So it all of a sudden gets muddled. And I would be thankful for assembly members to be capped at the 6 years, or maybe give or take, but we definitely need to have term limits.
Jeff?
I would support term limits.
Is there a specific number that you feel like in terms of
I would have to see proposals on that, definitely. I think different positions require different term limits, but I would support term limits, long-term term limits.
All right. In our last series of questions here address the party divide that we've seen really broil up over the last several months and years, for that matter. Jeff, we'll start with you. What do you say to voters who are curious about having representation in the majority and who believe that by electing a Democrat, communities in the district could gain more financially, if not on the legislative side as well? Well,
I disagree with that. Number one, what our focus is here, we're on both opposite ends of the spectrum, Matt and I. It's not going to happen. Our constituents in the 131st, Republican and Democrat, are on opposite sides of the fence here. You talk about defunding the police. The Republicans don't want to defund the police. The Democrats are in favor of that. You talk about several issues that come up throughout my career, and the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is a hot topic, and if you look at what the Democrats want to do with the Second Amendment, it's totally different than what the Republicans want to do with the Second Amendment. So the differences are stark. I mean, the differences are way stark on many of these issues. So is that going to happen where the Republicans or there's a lot of Democrats also that are in favor of the Second Amendment, and there's a lot of people that are saying our First Amendment rights are being trampled right now with the social media that's going on right now, and people are being kicked off Twitter and Facebook, and so these stark differences are always going to keep a divide in the 131st and every other district at upstate New York, because it's principles. It's it's what you believe in. So as far as that goes, there's always going to be that divide. But as far as coming together with legislation and performing the legislation and coming to the middle ground, people can actually get more done you give a little, you take a little. You give a little, you take a little. That's the way it works. That's the way it works in business. That's the way it works in politics. And quite frankly, there's just as much money that's going to come up here, in my estimation, if there's a Republican or if there's a Democrat. And who knows what's going to happen in this election? Who knows what's going to happen in this cycle, in the next 2 cycles? Maybe it flips. Who knows? We don't know that. So we have to vote our hearts and our heads and figure out what kind of representation we want representing us here in the 131st, but also other parts of the state and the country.
And Matt, I have the same style question for you. The district has been represented by a Republican for the last 2 decades, plain and simple. What do you say to voters who have concerns around electing a Democrat to represent them, given the dichotomy of politics in this rural district?
Definitely. And I am a moderate Democrat. I live in the middle. That's where I thrive, and that's where our district will thrive. And our parties and our people in this district aren't ever going to come together if all we talk about is the divisive side of things. Because right now, all the things that we're facing due to this pandemic and the problems facing before this pandemic, we were all facing the same thing. There's more that unites us than divides us. Every single Republican and every single Democrat can agree that we need to protect our lakes. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need to create jobs and lower taxes for hardworking families, support our farms and support our businesses. If we focus in on the issues that bring us together, we will come together. And those issues that divide us, we will still be divided on those topics, but we all can get along even though we disagree on certain topics. And it's funny because there has been multiple Republicans in this district, including Brian Kolb himself, the former minority leader. He was the most powerful Republican in the Assembly representing us. And he even admits that a Democrat will be able to change thousands of dollars coming into our district that he brings in to millions of dollars that a Democrat can bring into this district. And then we can go and tackle all those issues that unite us and stay away from the things that divide us.
I would like to respond to that. I have no idea where Assemblyman Kolb made the statement that a Democrat will be able to bring in millions more dollars than he has over his tenure as Assemblyman. I have followed Assemblyman Kolb's career quite closely. I've never, ever heard him refer to that statement at all. So I don't know, where that's actually coming from.
If you go to Google and type in Brian Kolb interview, Brian Kolb did an interview after some of the things that happened with him and him announcing his retirement. And there actually is a part where he says in there that the way Albany works and the way that the pieces of the pie are divided up, he actually says from thousands to millions. He says it in a video, and there's a transcript online that you can find.
All right, so we're going to shift gears now and close this thing out. We're going to go to closing statements. Matt, you will lead us off here.
Awesome. Coming to age in a world of politics like this, I saw nothing but chaos and division. And then I constantly kept hearing the answer, well, that's just the way it is. So when I went to go vote in 2018, I saw half of my ballot empty. And that really discouraged me. And then I went and looked and saw further into it that nobody has been running for those seats in over decades. And now we can have a choice and we can have a chance to finally say, this isn't the way things are going to be. If we keep electing the same types of people to this position, we're going to be in the same exact spot that we have always been, forgotten and overlooked. By electing me, you can have a voice in Albany with the majority on day one, and we can work together to solve all the problems that we face. Our schools are going to be funded because together we are going to stand up to the governor. Our roads and our lakes will be fixed and protected because together we will solve these issues. And our schools and our children and our families and our neighbors and our friends will have a community to thrive in when we focus in on community resilience, focusing on ending the opioid crisis, ending the homelessness crisis, and ending the mental health crisis. Together, we will put aside our differences and we will march into Albany with a fierce voice of advocacy for the Finger Lakes region. And we are finally going to have our voices heard and our district represented.
Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm the only candidate in this race with the experience, the trust, ethics, and knowledge to represent the 131st district. And I mentioned ethics. If you want to go to Albany and make laws, you have to abide by the laws. I filed all my financial filings on time. My opponent hasn't done that. I filed my ethics report on time, and my opponent hasn't done that. I have the negotiation skills and real-life experience to go to Albany to get the job done. I've lived my entire life here in this district. I know what it's like to struggle. I've been there. I've worked 2 jobs. I've done the things that I've had to do to get my family the things that they needed in order to succeed and be successful. I've worked hard to take my family on vacation. I've had the struggles facing the residents of this district. I know that their needs. I know the solutions. I know how to get our region in New York State back to the Empire State that it once was. Bringing back employers, jobs, and the dreams of our youth. The dreams of our youth that are Matt's age. To succeed here is not an impossible dream or task. It's doable. We need to work together to get this done. Some things we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about veterans and their access to health care. The critical family funds that our governor threatens to take out of the budget every year. We didn't talk about the heroin crisis, the opioid crisis, where we need additional treatment options in our area. And we need to work with healthcare professionals here to bring that to our community. And we didn't talk about the ethics so much at all. And we've got crooked politicians that are going to jail in New York State. They need to be held accountable, and they need to lose their pensions. Let's talk about those things too, because that's what's going to make us great again. That's what's going to make us the Empire State again. It's not easy also to obtain endorsements. And each candidate is scrutinized, interviewed, and discussed within the prospective organizations who should get their endorsement, and then the decisions made. And I can tell you that I've been through several of these, and my endorsements include Senator Pamela Helming, 15 supervisors out of 21 on the Ontario County Board of Supervisors, the Ontario County Clerk, the Ontario County Treasurer, CSEA, New York State Professional Firefighters, New York State Police Investigative Association, the New York State Police, PBA, the Ontario County Back to Blue, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Protect Our Police Pact, the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce, Rochester's Committee for a Strong Economy, SCOPE, NRA, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Local 82, Corrections Union. It goes on and on. New Yorkers for Constitutional Reforms, New York State Association of Realtors. So I will serve with trust and integrity, and I will bring back to this district the rightful funds that we deserve for our infrastructure, for our education, and for our police and first responders that we so need. Thank you, Josh.
And I thank you both for participating tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Special thanks to Madej Mears and Ricky for making this debate possible. Another big thank you to the candidates for participating and everyone watching or listening at home. An audio-only podcast version of this debate will be available this evening on the Debrief feed. Visit fingerlakes1.com/daily to listen or search The Debrief on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Good night.